It's a narrative so unnervingly repetitive, it's become familiar in the U.S.
This week, our nation was shocked and horrified when a gunman opened fire.
As I was leaving the gym, someone warned me not to go outside, that there's a man with a gun.
The gunman, the number of casualties, the location, that may all change, but one thing remains the same. The perpetrator in a mass shooting is almost always a man. I'm Imaeyen, this is AJ+, and this Sunday we are on a trip to find out why so many men are mass shooters, what other commonalities they have, and what we can do to prevent it.
And on my worst day, I could beat the hell out of you.
I don't think so.
You will.
The answer to why so many mass shooters in the U.S. are men may have something to do with this cowboy. Well, not exactly this cowboy, it's more about his image and what he represents, manhood. We are headed right now to Stanford University to meet up with Marcy Bianco so she can tell us about why there's this disparity between men and women when it comes to mass shootings.
I see the origins of mass shootings to be a combination of the American sense of masculinity and the idea of the American man and the myths of American manhood. I think the American cowboy is one of the great American myths. And that is someone who loves freedom, who seeks exploration, and who feels very entitled to that freedom.
Men account for a little less than 50% of the U.S. population, and yet they're the majority of perpetrators in U.S. mass shootings. Bianco says the gender disparity might be explained by the way the U.S. perceives and markets guns.
Guns themselves actually have been given a gender. How do you represent yourself as powerful, as virile, as aggressive, as strong? You own a gun.
Bianco says U.S. culture is defining masculinity by its lack of proximity to femininity. And that might be one reason why we're not seeing as many female mass shooters.
It's not biological, but it is very much cultural. Guns are cultured or kind of codified to be men's toys. Like if you go into a toy store, guns are not in the girl aisle, right? Guns are in the boys' aisle.
And this difference doesn't mean women are any less capable of violent acts.
Women and men are actually equally violent. Women aren't any less violent than men, but they use less lethal type means usually.
And it's not just gender most mass shooters have in common. Another overlooked thread is a history of domestic violence. Omar Mateen, the deadliest shooter in U.S. history who killed 49 people at Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida, he had a history of it. So did San Bernardino school shooter Cedric Anderson, who killed his wife and had a history of domestic violence allegations. And James T. Hodgkinson, who was seen assaulting his daughter. Then there's Robert Louis Deere and Sung Wee Cho, and the list goes on.
If a man feels that he can physically and emotionally harm his intimate partner, and that is okay, then of course he can go onto the street and do what he wants to a larger community, because no one will criminalize him or penalize him for doing so.
And if domestic violence is a common thread among U.S. mass shooters, Bianco says misogyny is often intertwined because of how the culture defines manhood. Elliot Rodger killed 6 people after posting rants online about women rejecting him romantically, and then he used that rejection as fuel for his murderous acts.
Girls are not sexually attracted to me. There's a major problem with that. A major problem. That's a problem that I intend to rectify.
And that type of distorted logic is common among mass shooters, according to Ms. Getty. This idea that shooters are psychotic is just wrong.
It's all about perception. They know what they're doing. They know what they're doing is wrong. They feel justified in doing it because of their fantasy and their perception that these people have wronged them, and therefore they feel right in what they're doing.
So even with all this information about manhood, misogyny, and domestic violence as common characteristics, if we wanted to sketch out a likely profile of a mass shooter, we couldn't. And that's because the catalyst for each man is different.
Prevention's difficult. This is not something you can say, wow, we could stop this tomorrow. These are not people who just snap. These are planned, and they can be extremely well planned. The planning depends upon the person.
Ms. Getty says there are 2 types of gunmen. One will target anyone, and another will look for specific victims, but both of them have distorted vision. So gender, a distorted perception, a history of domestic violence, and misogyny, those are all common traits for mass gunmen. But there is one more thing that US mass shooters have in common. They're white. 50 of the 90 mass shooters since 1987 have been white. That's 55%, which is intriguing because the US Census says 77% of the nation is white, and white men specifically make up about 31% of the population. So why are they so overrepresented in mass shootings? Well, it all goes back to that cowboy.
So when we think about gun culture in America and its origins, so profoundly located in this sense of white America, and America as a white nation. Men who have, from the day that this country was founded as an American nation, have had full freedoms and liberty to act as they would like to act.
She says the definition of manhood in the United States is directly tied to heterosexual white male masculinity.
White men historically in this country have felt entitled to certain ways of being, and they've seen the world change, and as a result they feel defensive, that they need to take up guns, take up arms, and defend themselves against changes in America.
On the same day, a white gunman named James T. Hodgkinson targeted a congressional baseball game. An Asian man named Jimmy Lamb killed 3 of his coworkers, 2 men, 2 different races on opposite sides of the country. So what can we do? How can we fix this?
If we had proper gun reform, gun control legislation that actually prohibited open carry, that required background checks, I think in turn we would see a kind of curbing of mass shootings in America. And we've seen this in other countries.
Australia hasn't seen a mass shooting in 20 years after enacting gun legislation in 1996. Bianco says that the United States needs gun legislation that fits the 21st century. And Mascari, she says that when mass shootings happen, we shouldn't be focusing on the gunmen.
When these incidents happen, just give the facts and focus on the victims.
So there seem to be a lot of commonalities between mass gunmen in the US. What do you guys think? Tell us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and join us every Sunday for your news in context.